If your legs are bouncing while you sit, you probably think it's just stress. Or maybe you've tried to stop it and realized you can't. But here's the thing. This behavior has a biological root that goes straight back to how your brain's dopamine system actually works. And if you try to suppress it, your brain pays a real price. Not a metaphorical one, an actual measurable cost in focus and cognitive performance. There's a part of your brain called the basal ganglia. It's in charge of controlling movement, but its real job is to create a link between movement and dopamine. Every single time your body moves, this region releases dopamine. Now, some people have a particular trait. Their dopamine system is more sensitive to stillness, meaning when they sit still, their dopamine levels drop faster than everyone else's. The brain registers this drop as a deficit, and to compensate, it finds a quick fix. Bouncing your leg, biting your nails, tapping your fingers on the table. All of these behaviors share one goal: bring dopamine levels back to normal. So when your leg is shaking under the desk, your brain is actively fixing a shortage. It's a biological mechanism doing exactly what it was built to do. And fighting it without understanding it is like trying to fix a car by ignoring the warning light on the dashboard. You're not solving the problem. You're just making yourself more frustrated. Now, you might be wondering, why do some people have this and others don't? The answer is in the structure of your dopamine receptors. People with less sensitive dopamine receptors need more stimulation to reach the same level of focus and calm as everyone else. Leg bouncing is one of the simplest forms of stimulation the body has instant access to. This is a genetic difference, a neural structure that's been there since birth. And this neural structure doesn't just show up as leg bouncing. It comes with a whole set of personality traits too, which we'll get into later. But the core idea is this. Your baseline for stimulation is higher than average, and your body has been quietly figuring out the cheapest, easiest way to meet it since you were a kid. That's not a weakness, that's adaptation. This behavior actually comes in two completely different types. The first type is situational. It only shows up during stress, during waiting, during high-pressure moments. The second type is structural. It's part of how that person's brain fundamentally operates, and it's always there whether the situation calls for it or not. You can't treat these two the same way because they don't come from the same place. If you don't know which type you are, you're missing a pretty important piece of self-knowledge. And that gap matters more than you might think, because a lot of people spend years living with a behavior without ever understanding where it actually comes from. They try to fix it, and they feel embarrassed by it. They apologize for it in meetings. And none of it works because they're solving the wrong problem entirely. Most people assume this behavior is purely about anxiety. And honestly, that makes sense on the surface. When your brain is under stress, your sympathetic nervous system kicks in. This system is designed to prep your body for action. Heart rate goes up, muscles tighten, and your body starts producing extra energy. When you're stuck in a meeting and can't physically release that energy, your body finds another way out: leg bouncing. But here's where people get it wrong. Anxiety increases the intensity of this behavior, but it's not the root cause. People who bounce their legs do it even when they're completely calm and relaxed, sitting at home watching something they enjoy with nothing stressful happening at all, because the origin is in the dopamine system, not in anxiety. Anxiety is just gasoline on a fire that was already burning. There's a concept called embodied cognition. It basically says that thinking and processing don't only happen inside the brain. The body plays a direct role in how we process information. Physical movement influences how the brain handles and organizes data. Leg bouncing is one of those movements. When your leg is moving, you're literally helping your brain process information more efficiently. This isn't a new idea either. Philosophers and scientists have been pointing at the mind-body connection for decades, but only recently has neuroscience caught up with the tools to actually measure it. A study from the University of Central Florida found that children with ADHD showed improved working memory performance when they were allowed to bounce their legs during tasks. The movement was directly supporting their focus, not disrupting it. Think about what that means. The The thing teachers spent years telling kids to stop doing was actually the thing keeping those kids in the game. That's why suppressing this behavior doesn't just feel uncomfortable. It actually removes a processing tool from your brain. The result? Disrupted focus, disrupted emotional processing, and a brain that now has to work harder to do the same job it was doing before you forced it to sit still. The connection between this behavior and ADHD is a whole conversation on its own. People with ADHD have lower baseline dopamine levels, and their brains constantly seek stimulation to compensate for that deficit. Leg bouncing is one of the ways the brain generates that stimulation from within when the environment isn't providing enough. But not everyone who bounces their leg has ADHD. Not even close. This behavior exists in people with completely typical brain function. The difference is that in ADHD, the behavior is more intense, harder to control, and usually comes alongside a whole cluster of other patterns, like struggling to stay on one task, jumping between topics without finishing anything, losing track of conversations, or finding anything that requires patience genuinely painful to sit through. But if your legs bounce and the rest of your life feels pretty manageable, you're most likely dealing with a simple dopamine variation, not a disorder, and that distinction actually matters a lot for how you approach managing it day to day. Research has shown that people who bounce their legs tend to share a few common personality traits. Their threshold for boredom is lower than average. Their mind gets restless faster than their environment does and starts looking for new stimulation before the current situation has anything new to offer. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing at all. Some of the most creative and productive people have exactly this trait because their minds are constantly generating ideas, drawing connections, and need new input to keep running at full capacity. Sitting in a slow meeting isn't boring to them because they're lazy. It's boring because their brain is operating at a pace the environment can't match. These people also tend to face more challenges when processing heavy emotions. When something feels overwhelming, their body instinctively looks for a physical outlet to share the load. The leg moves before they even consciously realize they needed to release something. It's the body's way of saying, I've got more internal pressure than I can hold, and I need somewhere for it to go. This behavior is also linked to a higher level of internal awareness. These people are more tuned in to their inner states than most. They notice stress earlier, sometimes before they've even consciously identified the source of it. They register restlessness sooner, and their body reacts faster than average. In a lot of ways, it's like having a more sensitive nervous system. It picks up more signal, processes more information per second, but it also means more noise to manage throughout the day. The same sensitivity that makes them quick to respond also makes them harder to settle when things get quiet, and understanding that trade-off is a huge part of actually working with your own brain instead of constantly being at war with it. Now, here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. This behavior connects to introversion and extroversion in a really specific way. Introverts tend to show this behavior more in loud, crowded, or socially intense environments. Their brains get overloaded from too much external stimulation, and the leg movement becomes a self-regulation tool, a way to create some internal rhythm in the middle of external chaos. Extroverts, on the other hand, tend to show this more in quiet, low-stimulation environments, because their brains are running low on input and are restless, searching for something to engage with. Same exact behavior, two completely opposite causes. And if you don't know which camp you fall into, you'll keep putting yourself in the wrong environments and wondering why you always feel slightly off, slightly uncomfortable, slightly not quite right. There's also something worth understanding about what actually happens when people try to force themselves to stop. A lot of people feel embarrassed about this behavior, especially in professional or formal settings, so they consciously try to hold completely still. And what tends to happen is that the energy doesn't disappear, it just relocates. It shows up as tension in the jaw, tight shoulders, relentless finger tapping, or an inability to fully track what someone is saying because part of your brain is now dedicated to suppression instead of listening. Your brain pulled resources away from thinking and gave them to stillness performance. You didn't solve the problem, you just made it invisible while quietly making everything else harder. What's also worth knowing is that this behavior scales with mental load. The more demanding the cognitive task, the stronger the urge becomes. People often notice they bounce their legs most when they're deep in problem solving or trying to hold a complex idea in their head, not when they're doing something mindless. That's not a coincidence. That's your brain pulling in every available resource to meet the demand being placed on it. The movement is part of the cognitive effort, not a break from it. Recognizing that changes how you see the whole thing. Understanding this behavior isn't just about making peace with shaking your leg in public. It's about building an accurate picture of how your brain is actually wired, what it genuinely needs to function well, and why forcing it into a shape it was never designed to do tends to create more problems than it solves. You're not being disrespectful when your leg bounces. You're not being anxious or nervous or childish or unprofessional. Your brain is running a background process that keeps it operational, and most of the time it knows exactly what it's doing, even when it looks like nothing. If this video gave you something to think about, drop a like and let me know in the comments whether you recognize this in yourself. See you in the next one.